We are in 11, first half.
Exactly.
1 Corinthians 11:1 is where we're going to start. I'm going to talk about covered heads today. Now, one use of any word like hat, helmet, turban, scarf, veil, or shawl. No mention of anything man-made as far as a head cover in this section. A lot of people went to church for a long time, had to put the veils and their caps on and that stuff, and that's not there. There's use of the words head covered or uncovered, shaved, hair, long hair. Isn't that great how Dan and Joyce showed up on this time? Perfect timing. Deuteronomy 22:12. You shall make yourself tassels on the four corners of your garments with which to cover yourself. Love that picture. 1 Corinthians 11:1. Imitate me just as I also imitate Christ. Thank you, Lord Jesus. We ask your blessings upon the teaching. We ask us to see what you have for us, to hold it in our hearts, and to put it on our lips and tongues so we can share with others, to help them find the true you. In your name we pray. Amen. Paul knew he followed Jesus, so he did not hesitate to tell Corinthian Christians to imitate his walk with the Lord. As we've said repeatedly, you may be the only Bible some people will ever see. Paul simply did what he told his young associate Timothy to do. Be an example to the believers in word, in conduct, in love, in spirit, in faith, and purity. 1 Timothy 4:12. Do as I do. Not do as do as I say, do as I do. Show them the path. I don't want people to see me. I want them to see Jesus. Will you say this? How few today are willing to say what Paul said? Instead, because of compromise and godliness, says, don't look at me, look at Jesus. I'm going to go out and party. I'm going to go out and have my fun. But I'm a Christian. I'm there on Sunday. I can raise my hand. I can sit in my pew. I know my spot. That's how it is. I'm right with Jesus for at least an hour and a half a week. That's not what it's supposed to be. It's easy to put it together. Everybody, I think, in this room's been married. We know what the honeymoon period is. Everything's great. Everybody can get along for a period of time. And then suddenly you can't hide the real you. It starts to pop out. People get to see you, really get to know you. In this specific context, it is a little difficult to know if Paul's words here relate to the context before or after. Does Paul refer back to 1 Corinthians 10 and therefore mean follow my example as I seek to bless others instead of pleasing myself? Or does it mean in what follows in 1 Corinthians 11, therefore mean follow my example as I respect God's order and authority in the church? Though he most likely connects it with what went before, it's good for both. You can't go wrong attaching to either side. I'm going to opt out for why couldn't he be? Follow the orders, follow the way it's supposed to be. Imitate. This also sets a limit and direction on the way we're to imitate others. Traditions. Yeah. I picked this one up because most of us have recognized this one. 1 Corinthians 11, 2 through 3. Now I praise you, brethren, that you remember me in all things and keep the traditions just as I delivered them to you. But I want you to know that the head of every man is Christ, the head of every woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. So does this mean we should all be dressing like Tevye and walking around and that and complaining? Your kids have got to do the things, you get to choose their spouses, you can choose. No. I praise you that you remember in all things keep the traditions. Paul again speaks sarcastically to the Corinthians, the Christians there. In fact, they do not remember Paul in all things. They disregard him as they sought fit. Additionally, they did not have any traditions they should have. The Corinthians were crazy. What were they going to keep as far as their traditions? We're going to go down and eat the cheap meat from the idols. We're going to go out and party. This is the party town. This is a pretty wild place in Corinth. Keeping the traditions becomes a scary phrase to many Christians. It brings forth the idea that we're bound to some ancient, outdated tradition and conduct, that we have to be a particular way. Have you seen, and I'm not picking on everybody, but there's several groups that walk around and they've got black clothes down to their ankles. Their hair looks like something out of the 1890s. And that's their way of worshiping God. They're locked to that tradition. They think that's how it's supposed to be. But the traditions Paul delivered to the Corinthian Christians were simply the teachings and practices of the apostles received from Jesus. Paul was not talking about ceremonies, not rituals, not any of that stuff. Not traditions. We don't get to run around in the streets and sing and stomp our boots. Christ is the head of every man. The head of every woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. So now that I've offended at least half the people in the room, we'll get to this point and have it make some sense here. Paul set a foundation for his teaching in the rest of the chapter. Simply put, Paul makes it clear God has established principles of order and authority and accountability. Head is an important word in this chapter. Some consider head to mean nothing more than source, in the sense that the head of a river is its source. The word can also mean man came from Jesus, woman came from man, and Jesus came from God. Simple understanding is true. It goes much deeper, though, because biblical thinking is a source of inherent authority. If something comes from me, there is some appropriate authority I have over it. In a full sense, the head has the idea of headship or leadership or authority. It means to have the appropriate responsibility. That's a big disconnect in today's world. Everybody wants authority without responsibility. I can call the shots, and then when things blow up and people are trapped and can't get out of someplace, it was the guy before me. It was his fault. I took a date and threw away all the responsibilities and accountabilities. Wasn't me. If you ever saw Disney's Rocket Man, no matter what happens, the guy, wasn't me. It was her. It was him. We can't throw away the responsibility. You can't be in a position of authority without having responsibility for your actions, your deeds, and what you say. With this understanding, we see Paul describe the three headship relationship. Jesus the head of every man, man the head of a woman, and God the Father is head of Christ. Paul connects all three, so there must be something very interesting in what he's trying to get us to see. A lot of people, there's attitude options. You can have voluntary submission. Notice the key word here, voluntary submission. That doesn't mean the person over the top of you has the right to beat you, chain you, and force you into submission. I don't know if you saw the news today. There was a folk singer in Afghanistan, very popular folk singer. Under the Taliban understanding of the Quran, public music's illegal. They drug him out and shot him because he was a singer. He was a popular singer. That happened yesterday. So, our interpretation, what sounded voluntary about that? The only voluntary part he had was to bleed after he was shot. That's the only thing he could volunteer to do. That's not voluntary submission. That's not the attitude. We have rebellion. People can talk about stuff, but they can be fighting it. I'm not going to let him be my boss. Remember the little kids? You're not my boss. You're not my boss. The idea of headship and authority is important to God. In His great plan for the ages, one great thing God looks for man is voluntary submission. Does God send anybody to hell? No. If you want to come, follow me. If you don't, you have an option. It's voluntary. I stand at the door and knock for whoever will open it. I agree. It's essential to understand that being under authority does not equal inferiority. Just because you accept somebody in a leadership position and you're submitting to them doesn't make you an inferior or lesser person. Jesus was totally under the authority of God the Father. That's in John 5:19 and John 8:28. Yet He is equally God. We see that in John 1:1, John 8:58, and John 10:30. When God calls women in the church to recognize the headship of men, it is not because women are unequal or inferior, but because it's the God-ordained order of authority to be respected.
So,
Yes.
so what you just said, it's in order that it should be respected. So we should also respect women also, right?
Right. It can't be without respect.
Right.
If I'm in a position of authority in the church, I don't have the right to go and tell you what you can do, you can't do, and how to live your personal life. I can tell you what the Bible says. But I don't get to show up at your house and say, well, this has got to go, that's got to go. You can't see this person, you have to see that person. I don't have that authority. I have to respect you as a person. But if you're doing something that goes against God or is harmful to you, I can talk to you about it. I can say, this isn't right.
So it goes against God for women to preach.
Yes.
A woman can preach to a woman.
Just to a woman, not to a man.
And to
She
children.
can talk. You can have an open discussion. But to set her up in a position of authority
okay.
and call her the pastor,
Right. Okay.
that's, and we're going to get to that, that's an insult to the man because the men don't want to be men and step up and take their position.
The reason for that is because the woman was beguiled or
Right.
tricked by the devil.
Right, I know. I
You know,
understand.
and not Adam.
1 Corinthians 11:4 and 6. I just randomly found 3 women with some very interesting hairdos.
Wow.
I'm not saying these women are anything bad, but that's what popped up on the screen.
Right.
Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonors his head. Does that mean that if I've got to be a teacher, I got to be bald? Dan, you and I are in trouble. You more than me. But every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. For that is one and the same as if her head were shaved. For if a woman is not covered, let her also be shorn. But if it is shameful for a woman to be shorn or shaved, let her be covered. That makes a whole lot of sense, doesn't it? Dishonors his head, dishonors her head. Because of this authority, it is inappropriate for men to pray under a head covering, and it's inappropriate for women to pray without a head covering. The idea of the head covering was important in many ancient cultures. To wear the head covering, or veil in some translations, was a public symbol of being under the authority or the protection of another. It was a custom both among the Greeks and the Romans and among the Jews in expression law that no woman should be seen abroad without a veil. This was and is a common custom throughout the East. So that's a cultural thing that's put in there. The only women that went without veils in public were prostitutes.
Oh, wow.
So you covered up. But that wasn't the biblical meaning of it. Some cultures today, wearing a hat or some kind of head covering is a picture of humility and modesty. Same way head covering is important in different times. The use of the word veil is an unfortunate one since it tends to call into mind the full veil of the contemporary Muslim cultures, which cover everything but the eyes. I actually found a screen and I was going to show it. And it shows the different countries which veil level we're allowed to have
Wow.
based on which country you're in.
It's incredible.
Some it's just a minor head cover. Some of them, there's slits for the eyes. It depends on how far they go. So who is in authority? A man praying and prophesying, having his head covered, was to say in his actions, I'm not the one in authority. There's somebody over me, not necessarily the head covering. So this is really dealing with authority rather than it is the actual cover. The cover is the authority above you. I am under the authority of others because God has established that the head of the woman is a man. 1 Corinthians 11:3. It dishonors Jesus, his head, for a man to say this by wearing of a head cover. So, if the man sits under the teaching of the woman, it's one thing if it's a discussion, it's an educational thing, but if it's the ongoing teaching in the church and you're sitting under a woman, you're dishonoring God because you're not following the setup of the plan of what God made. On the same principle, for a woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered without having a person of authority over her is dishonoring that way. You can have a woman prophet. One of you could be given a prophecy right now by God. And it sits in here, and if it matches the Word of God, it's from God, and it's accepted, it's full authority. But if you're out on the street and you're claiming something that's totally against God, you're uncovered, you're exposed, and that's not acceptable. Because God has established the head of the woman, we've talked about that.
All the days was a play.
Under these words, Paul, women are free to pray or prophesy, but only when they demonstrate that they are under the authority of the leadership of the church, which is the men. That is one and the same as if her head was shaved. Understand, a woman with shaved head sometimes was considered a punishment. If she was caught in adultery, they would shave her head. If she were a homosexual, they would shave her head. These were signs of punishments. These were not something that they're talking about. And that's different cultures. If they're prostitutes, lesbians. So what we're really talking about really isn't about the hair. It's the position and the authority. 1 Corinthians 11, 7 through 10. What's the order? God the Father's on top, Jesus beneath. Beneath Jesus is man, and underneath man is a woman. 11:7. For a man indeed ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. For man is not from woman, but woman from man. You know, it gets back to that. It comes from the rib. The rib. Which sets me up for a really bad joke, and since this is being recorded, we're going to pass that.
You know, it's really interesting, you know, looking at your chart there. Everyone submits to all those above them. Woman submits to man, Jesus, and God the Father. Man submits to Jesus and God the Father. Then Jesus submits to God the Father.
And if we were to take it the step below woman, would be the children.
Yes.
And now, in some cultures, some religions, the male child does not submit to the mother.
Wow. Wow.
From the time that the kid is basically about 8, 9 years old, mom doesn't have a
She's
great deal
lower,
of authority.
subservient.
You can kind of guess which one it was. I was actually, when I was teaching, I worked, sometimes with handicapped kids. You can imagine that cultural play when their son was autistic.
Oh my.
Mom had no authority to try and control this autistic boy. It was a nightmare. This child was completely out of control. Not because of any of his actions, but because of his condition and the fact that there was no established right of authority over him in the household. 11:7. For a man indeed ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God. The woman is glory. We get back where we're at. For man is not from woman, but woman from man. Nor was man created from woman, but woman from man. For this reason, the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. Because of the angels. Now I'm lost, right? Completely lost. The reason first stated is found in 1 Corinthians 11:3. He said, head of the woman. God established an order of authority, the principle of male headship, both in the church, 1 Corinthians 11 and 1 Timothy 2, and then again in the home, Ephesians 5:23. He is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. Second reason is found for the order of creation. God created Adam first and gave him responsibility over Eve. One reason for male headship is the order and manner in which God was created. We've got some gender roles. Oh my God, now we're probably in trouble. Delete that from the tape. We can't have gender roles. It's just, in today's world, we can't have any form of authority. It's all about me. I'm the center. Remember 20, 30 years ago when everybody said, I'm my own little God. Shirley MacLaine stood on the beach and pronounced, I am God. I stood next to her in theory and said, you are nuts. Because what happens when you try and be God? If you were God, would you ever get sick? I wouldn't let myself get sick.
That's right.
I sure wouldn't let myself age. I wouldn't let myself fall apart. I mean, all I do is have to look at a series of pictures. If I'm God, I'm not doing such a good job.
Good analogy. I like
I wouldn't have to worry about what I eat.
that. I'm the great I am.
Exactly. I'm going to forget his name. Oh, wow. I went blank. He used to come in, he was a preacher. He was about 5'3" in both directions. Always wore his suspenders. Help me out. What was his name? Southern preacher. Large guy with the suspenders, married. Used to come in.
Gail Irwin?
Gail Irwin. He said that He thought Samson looked like him. Because if he looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger, everybody would have known he was strong. But if he would have looked like him, it would have been a good cover. So he had no problems with that. I mean, this was a man very humble. He talked about his first car. He got married and needed a car. So his dad goes down, brings home a car for him, hands him the keys. He thought, thanks, Dad. Then he handed him the payment booklet. Dad signed him up for the loan on the car.
Wow.
Can you imagine being able to do that today? Talk about authority in the household. My goodness. Genesis 2:23. This is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. That's where it's established. It comes back to this. Genesis 22. He brought her to the man. Adam was not brought to Eve, but Eve was brought to Adam, her head. It is an idea offensive to the spirit of our age. I get that. Nobody wants to hear that. But that's what it went down to. But because of angels. A third reason God has established male headship in the church is the presence of angels in corporate worship. Angels are present at any assembly of Christians for worship, and they note any departure from reverent order. Apparently, angels are offended by the violation. Passages such as this remind us that our struggle is bigger than ourselves. Who do we wrestle against? Principalities and everything, things we don't see. God has eternal things to teach the universe through us. Ephesians 3:10 through 11, 1 Corinthians 4 through 9, and 1 Peter 1:12. John Stott commented on Ephesians 3. He explained the broader idea. It is as if a great drama is being enacted, history is the theater, the world is the stage, and the church members in every land are the actors. God himself has written the play, and he directs and produces it. Act by act, scene by scene, the story continues to unfold. But who are the audience? Good question. Who's watching? They are the cosmic intelligences, the principalities, the powers in the heavenly places, and the non-believers. They're watching this. One of the reasons that a particular religion has spread among a certain minority group is it taught stability in the family. Because due to things like the war on poverty, the establishment of the welfare state, it destroyed families. It made it more profitable for the woman to have children than to have a husband. And so it destroyed the families. But none of these three reasons are culturally dependent. I like this. Different hairstyles. So what is, going to be your concept of this? What's appropriate? Who's going back to the 1980s? I mean,
Danny
come
likes
on.
it.
Oh, I like it.
He likes big hair.
I like big hair, but that's...
Well, there's
Probably
sparrows,
make
right?
mine look
The
like
1900s
that.
isn't going to happen for me.
Way out.
I mean, it looks like her head's going to fall over. Her poor neck's just struggling under the weight of everything. The 50s, we got Marilyn Monroe, the tight curls. 60s, Raquel Welch. 70s, Farrah. I remember when everybody tried to look like
Oh,
Farrah.
yeah, everybody else. It's coming back. The
You know,
wings, the feathers.
It was funny, my son's friend came back and he had this really neat hairdo, he thought. Completely shaved and this little square block of hair on the top of his head. I showed him a picture of my grandfather that was 100 years old with that hairdo.
It all
And what are you
cycles.
thinking?
Yeah, it all.
So culture is an interesting thing. That's what pressures us. The length of the hem, is it at the ankles? Is it at the collarbone? I wonder. We were driving home. We were going to stop and get something to eat last night for dinner. So we pull into the In-N-Out over here on G and Vineyard. The convention center's over there, there's
Oh,
hotels. I don't know what the convention was, but there's all these women walking down in basically thong swimsuits going
No
down.
kidding.
And I'm trying to think,
Really? Wow.
you know, they should have been arrested for crimes against spandex. I'm serious. There were some people that should not have been that uncovered.
This is the date, night.
Oh, broad daylight.
Wow.
Broad daylight. Because I'm sitting there in the drive-thru and I go, Mary, did you see that? I'm kind of starting to wonder if I've lost my mind.
Right. Well, I-
And it hits
Wow.
you what the culture will allow.
That's
We
crazy.
cannot say, Paul said that just because of thinking in the Corinthian culture that women need to be put in their place. These were rules that are established. These are God-set rules. Culture is an issue. Today, to sit there and say that women must submit to their husbands does not play very well. I mean, we can't even keep the women out of the men's restroom and the men out of the women's restroom in today's culture. How are we going to get a woman to submit in the house? So where are they supposed to submit? In the church? That's where the program was set up. It was to take care of that. In marriage? Yes. In general? No. A woman doesn't walk down the street and some man says, you get on that side of the street, you're just a woman.
Wow.
No, that is not what's taught. It's taught by the Taliban. It's
Wow.
taught by some crazy people. It is not taught in the Christian church nor through the Bible. The Bible is just as specific as that there is no general submission of women unto men commanded in society. Only in those spheres of the home and church. So when that guy says, I'm a man and you need to do this and that. No, sorry, that doesn't
You're
fly.
not my man.
Exactly. Unless he's your boss and he writes and signs your paycheck and then he has limited authority within that guideline. He doesn't. He's got a badge on, he's carrying a gun. Carrying a gun's a good reason for authority. I'm going to listen to somebody that has a gun when I don't. I kind of give that one up pretty quick. You know, that's not really authority sometimes, that's called smart. I don't understand this. I just saw another NBA player's in trouble. Domestic dispute. The police show up and oh my gosh, he's been injured. He's been harassed by the police. I don't know. I was grown up told that if the police tell you to sit down, don't move, shut your mouth, keep your hands up. Those were good things to listen to. They didn't always make you happy, but they were the smart things to do. It also does not mean that every woman in the church is under the authority of every man. I can't tell Joyce how to comb her hair. Can't tell you which chair to sit in. Except this one. This one's mine. That's the only one I have authority over.
That's why the Bible says to submit to your own husband.
Yep.
It's
very
specific, your own husband.
But that's not what the culture does. All you do to make something seem almost right or make something seem right wrong is you twist it just a little
Very
bit.
good, yes.
A word.
Slightly.
In the beginning was God. The Word was with God. Not a God. That's a change. That means a totally different thing. The failure of man to lead in the home and in the church, this is inexcusable. This is the submission of an authority that man is not to take. If he's going to sit there and give it up, that's on him. Some feel the recognition of submission of authority is an unbearable burden. Well, for the man that's supposed to be in charge of his wife, he's supposed to love her and treat her as Jesus treats him. I'm under the authority and I'm limited as to what I can do. I mean, if you ask me, have I beat my wife today, and I answer no more than she needed, what kind of an answer is that? It's one of those trap questions. Have you stopped beating your children? No, not yet. Yeah, but boy, I used to tear them up. I mean, this is not what is allowed. I've said to them that I am inferior, I'm nothing. Nowhere in the Bible does it call for women or children to say that, or men to say that to anything. Somebody said the church cannot work or cannot work well unless we get along with the times and put women in positions of spiritual and doctrinal authority. No. Look what it's done in some of the churches where they've done these things. Now all of a sudden, the pastor he's been a great teacher, he's been great, and his kid's suddenly 18 years old, and I'm coming out of the closet. So the entire church, we have to change the Bible because gay is now acceptable because my kid's out of the closet. God doesn't change. Your kid has an issue that you need to address and he needs to address with God. You don't change the church. The issues of headship and submission are there. Citizens do not have to have the same respect for government authorities. Students do not have the same respect for the teacher's authority anymore. I gotta tell you, when I worked as a substitute teacher and you walked into a classroom, you want to talk about being abused or attempting to be abused? I did have my ways of doing it, because in a classroom, you have these little cards sometimes, records of emergency contact information. And this little kid, little gang kid, thought he was really tough in the junior high school situation. He's gonna hold on just a second. He's gonna flip through the card, found his card. Called his dad at work. Hey, Mr. So-and-so, I'm your son's teacher today, and apparently he's got a lot to say, and I thought maybe he'd like to talk to you about it right now. Can you come up here?
Oh, boy.
I handed him the phone.
Wow.
The kid was in tears, quivering. Never a problem again.
Wow.
Because he realized there was a rule and an authority. I didn't beat him. I just let him know that I was willing to share. Sometimes you have to take that step. In the Lord, however, woman is not independent of man. Okay. We can stop right there. Pretty good, guys. We're set. Dag nabbit, there's a tail on that area. Nor is man independent of woman. Well, there goes my fun. Nevertheless, neither is man independent of woman, nor woman independent of man. For as a woman came from man, even so man also came through woman. But all things are from God. Okay? There goes our chance to be the dominating, abusing, controlling person. Took that away in one fell swoop. On top of all Paul has said about male headship in the church, it would be wrong to consider the headship as the only dynamic at work between men and women in the church. They must also remember neither are independent of each other, so men and women, there is no place for men to lord over the women. Now, you go to some churches and some organizations, the men sit up front, the women sit in the back. Any ideas why that might be? Some it's like, that's the position of authority. Some cases that's true. Some cases is the men can't be trusted to not be distracted by the women. We have, good, the camera's not facing me. Our son, who may be teaching for us, we're not sure, we're going to talk about that in a little bit, has this condition he inherited from his mother. He talks with his hands. Unbelievable. He talks about the fire. You name it, he goes with it. You chopped his hands off, the boy would be mute. No doubt about it. So he would volunteer at this drug rehab facility called U-Turn for Christ. And they would go down from the church and they would do the music and they would teach. Well, what they would do at U-Turn so that the men wouldn't be distracted by the women during the church services and the teaching, the men sat up front and the women sat in the back. Because if the men were caught talking to the women at the wrong time, they were handed a shovel, they got to go dig holes.
Wow.
Not a whole lot of fun. It's a good way to keep in control. So our son and his group showed up same time this group of Methodists from Africa showed up. And being that they'd come a much further distance than our son's group had, they deferred to let them teach. And so they get up there, and they're in their kind of classic, loose-flowing stuff, whatever, and they start singing, and the women start jumping. And as my son said, she was like this. And the poor men in the front are going, I want to dig a hole! I don't want to, what am I supposed to do?
Oh my gosh.
So sometimes there are reasons these authorities are set up.
Wow.
You don't put things in front of people. I had the same reaction when he told me the story. I died laughing. I couldn't believe this. Even after he has stressed the subordination of women, Paul goes on to stress even more directly the partnership of men and women. Neither can live without each other. Though Paul recognized the order of creation He saw that they were important, that they came together, even though Paul wasn't married at this point in time. But on the other side, it says creation of the first man, all men are by the woman. We can't say that men exist without women. We only have one example of one man that came without a woman, and that was Adam. It's all interconnected. God's plan was perfect. We screwed it up, but his plan was perfect. Therefore, the man who rules in the church or in the home without love does not recognize the importance of what God has given him in a woman, has given him in a partner. And from a person who deals with the legal aspects of it, that's the only place on the planet I use the word partner. Because in business, the word partner is just a horrific thing because of the legal ramifications. A man who can only rule by stamping his foot and raising his voice is better off to stay single. A man who knows how to govern his house through the love of the Lord and by following that example is going to have a good marriage. Is it going to be perfect? No. Can you say that the relationship between most Christians and God, that God is perfect? No, we screw it up. People are real good at doing this. G. Campbell Morgan recalls a story an older Christian woman told him who had never been married. She said, "I never met a man who could master me."
Well, who is it? What?
G. Campbell Morgan, he was a teacher. And the old woman told him, "I never met a man that could master me." If she couldn't be mastered, if she wasn't willing to submit, voluntarily submit, she was better off to stay single. 1 Corinthians 11:13 through 16. What is proper? Judge among yourselves. Is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? Does not even nature itself teach you that if a man has long hair, it is a dishonor to him? Sorry. But if a woman has long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given to her for a covering. But if anything seems to be contentious, we have no such custom, nor does the Church of God. What's acceptable? Exactly. I'll be honest with you. If I didn't look in a mirror and I counted on her for my hair length, I'd look a whole lot more like Dan. She likes long hair. This is part of my uniform. I can't do what I do and go in front of certain people and have them respect or believe that this is the position that I'm in. You know, COVID's been a big change. Up till that, I've worn a tie almost every day of my life. I can tie a tie at 70 miles an hour. I go down the freeway, I can steer my elbow, I can do this thing and get it done. I had the electric shaver, I could get, hit the high spots. Okay, distracted driving, not a good thing. But that was the uniform, that was the expectation of what I was in. So does a woman with short hair, should we condemn her for that? No, that's a cultural choice. That's a style choice. Do I have a preference? I have a personal preference. But that's for me. That's what I like. Do I note some of the women that have hair to their ankles and think they look like Cousin Ed? Yeah, sometimes I do have that sense. There was a woman the other day, if she wouldn't have had heels, she would have been stepping on it. I could not believe it. Very, very long.
Crystal Gill, remember?
Mhm.
Crystal Gill was.
I had a friend in high school. She came into her high school, her freshman year, with a pixie cut. The year before, her hair was halfway between her knees and her ankles.
Wow.
She had done some commercials and some ads for that. She was going through a hairdryer about every 3 to 8 days. It was such a challenge for her to keep the hair up. She says, I can't get through school having to be up at 6 in the morning to be for this and this stuff. So she whacked it off, donated it to
Locks of
make
Love.
wigs, Locks of Love. And she did something positive with it. So judge among yourself. Is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? Here Paul speaks to the Christians who came from a Jewish environment. In the Jewish community, every man covered their heads while praying. It was therefore inconceivable for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered. Their own experience taught them that women should observe the same custom. They should have something. The Jewish men with the yarmulke, they always had that on as respect. But does not even nature itself teach? In both the Jewish and Greek cultures, short hair was common for men. I've got some Jewish friends that tell me, that when they went after they got in the military and they were involved with the reserves, they had wigs that they would wear when they were going for the reserves because they had their Jewish fros. Jewish men will get a fro like an African American. They can get so they had the little wig that they could put on so they would fit the part while they were there in the National Guard, and afterward they'd pull it off and then they could go back to their normal hair. For as long as we have known, women have generally worn their hair longer than men. Generally. Not always, not absolutely, generally. Those terms, absolute terms, tend to drive me crazy. Always, never. You don't always do something because the time you do something different, that's why it stands out, because it's not what you normally do. I never do this. Yeah, you will. Say you won't do it and set the time clock going and see how long it is till you break it. I'm going to stop doing this. Hit the button and see how long it takes you to screw that one up. Based on this verse, many people thought it was a sin for a man to wear long hair. I remember as a kid, I hated it. When I was 5 years old, I had no choice. It was a butch. And, the Beatles were around and everybody else was around. My brother was ready to run away because my dad said he looked like a girl. Because his hair was a little bit longer. It was like this.
Wow.
We accepted some things. We got culture crazy. Her hair is given her for a covering because women wear their hair longer than men do. Paul thinks of the longer hair as nature's veil. Nature's given women longer hair and covering. That in for itself points to the woman's need to be covered. This also goes to the point that in some cultures, as a man matures, when he becomes a man, he's got to have facial hair. An adult man without facial hair, there's something wrong with him. That's considered bad in their culture. And then others go, well, men with beards, you're out of control, you're a rebellion. No, it doesn't matter. The Bible's clear, don't dress like a woman if you're not a woman. If anyone seems to be contentious, we have no such custom. In this appeal to apostolic authority, Paul tells the Corinthian Christians to not be contentious. Relax. Take it easy. Get over it. Especially because the other churches of God have adopted their customs according to God's truth. When somebody starts to hand you a pamphlet and says, these are the rules, you can't understand the Bible without this magazine, you have to join this group, you're not on our list. You can't get to heaven if you're not on our list. It's funny, I only read the Bible. There's only one book I ever heard that my name has to be in, that's the Book of Life. Not in the book of Bob Thompson or somebody Smith or whoever. It's all back to God. We all start creating these crazy rules. Knock it off. It's not what gets you to heaven. It doesn't say Jesus and a haircut. It doesn't say Jesus and anything. Again, the guy on the cross next to him, he didn't cut his hair. They didn't change his clothes. He got what he was. Jesus took him as he was, where he was. And that's the important thing we need to learn. Thank you, Lord Jesus, for this time. We ask your blessings upon us in your name. Amen. We split this book into two sections because one was very long.